Hello, it is so good to be with you today, Mom. Welcome back to Connection from Here.
Well, it is so great to be here, and we have a special treat with us today. Rhiana is joining
Rhiana's
us.
here.
Yeah.
Not the singer.
Hi.
Not the
Not the mega pop star, but a
That's
close
right.
second.
That's right. Yeah. She may can belt out a tune here and there, but this is our Rhiana. This is Rhiana Wiggins, and we have been waiting for this day to have Rhiana with us on the podcast because she is such a joy and is a part of our team. Rhiana is a longtime hospice nurse and is now a chaplain and has been with us as part of our hope-based team for a long time now and is working with us as we build community and build out care and connection for others. And so thank you, Rhiana, for finally coming in front of the microphone.
Oh gosh, you don't have to thank me. It's such a treat to be here with you too. I love listening to the episodes you've created, and the spirit and joy you bring to this podcast is infectious. I'm happy to be here today.
More people than ever are stepping away from organized religion. So where do we turn for support, meaning, and connection? Hi friends, and welcome to Connection from Here, finding community in a changing world. I'm Michelle Perry.
And I'm Ashley Beatty Perry.
We're so happy you're here.
One of the reasons we wanted to gather here on the podcast was we've been doing a lot of work around building community and building connection. And so a lot of the kind of conversations you and I and Michelle have had are about what does community look like now?
Yeah.
And it's kind of a conversation because I think for many of us, community is now looking different. We feel like we're lacking it. Some of us have come from maybe prior religious, affiliations where there was community, and now we are finding ourselves out of that, but still kind of searching for community. So that's kind of one of the things I wanted to talk with you more about today is that sense of as we are in this new landscape, trying to figure out what does community look like for us now. So I really do appreciate there's a lot that we want to talk about with you around those areas.
Yeah, thank you. I'm really glad that you started this podcast. I think just the name Connection from Here really says something about what you two have been trying to build, what Hope Base is offering, and what you are bringing to the listeners. And you've touched on something that I think is so true for so many of us. And you've quoted some of the statistics from the Surgeon General and whatnot. And I came across a note the other day in a book where it said 3 out of 5 Americans report a sense of loneliness.
Yeah.
It's really profound. And so looking at how we find where we belong, looking at how we feel connected, looking at what we name as community, it really does impact our lives and the quality of our lives. And so I look forward to this conversation today to share a little bit about my journey and what connection and community has been like for me. And some of it's not easy and some of it's joyful and all of the above.
Well, and that may be a good place for us to start too, is in your growing up, what did community look like or feel like to you at that point, or the lack thereof? I mean, I would say, to not assume that there was community, but like, and you look back in your like childhood years and starting from that point, what did community or a lack thereof feel like to you at that point?
That's a profound question, actually. And I've spent some time reflecting on that since we've been working together. And I think it's really poignant that you said, or lack thereof, because I think for my story, it was a profound lack of community and lack of connectedness in my childhood. To see how that's informed how I've lived my life is pretty distinct. So to hit some of the painful notes of my childhood, I was the daughter of an active alcoholic mother who also was mentally unwell. And she had been in and out of a mental hospital, a psychiatric ward, receiving shock treatment therapy. And I was very young at that point. And also dealing with a father who really didn't have the resources to be emotionally sensitive or emotionally available. And then my mother chose to leave. I was 9 and my sister was 13. And she didn't just leave us, she left the country.
Wow.
So that created a lot of deep wounding and a lot of loneliness in my life. And then a couple of years later, when my father remarried, someone also a bit emotionally unavailable, they moved us from my working class neighborhood where, there were kids on my street next door and lots of ways to interact, to a fairly remote outlying suburb outside of Pittsburgh where I grew up. And there were only 6 houses on my mile-long road and no kids. And now all my friends were an easy 30-minute, 45-minute drive away. So I ended up being pretty lonely and pretty isolated. An older sister who was struggling with her own response to the traumas we were encountering. And she was angry and mean and didn't want to be bothered by a younger sister, which was her wounding. There was not much community. It led me to look for community in places that turned out to be not so healthy for me.
This is so interesting to hear, Rhiana, because it feels like a child's search for community almost feels like a biological need. And so when you're talking about a lack of, it really is a sense of, we've talked in some previous episodes about we are social creatures that are meant to exist in a community atmosphere. And so what you're talking about in describing these experiences of your childhood, there is real woundedness that is now happening because that basic need is not there.
That's right. Absolutely. I mean, as a Buddhist, I'm a Zen Buddhist chaplain and a Zen Buddhist practitioner. I've been studying Buddhism for about 30 years now. One of our core beliefs is the interconnectedness of everything. And what that tells us is we are relational beings. We need to be in connection with others as a sense of feeling whole. And so for me, especially as a child, when you're not receiving that nurturance from your parents and you don't have other children around you and other families around you, it can be really devastating, which is what, for me, ended up leading me toward the Episcopal Church, which was a very strange thing. My father was a devout atheist, and my mother wasn't very religious. She had taken us to a few churches before she left us to try and expose us. But when we moved out to this new suburb, one of the things that the girls in my class were doing was going to the Episcopal Church on Sundays. So I bought the clothes that they were wearing, the little patent leather Mary Jane shoes and some tights and the proper skirt. And I had my father drive me and drop me off at the church. And I ended up joining the confirmation class. And I went through the confirmation process as an Episcopalian. And I'll tell you that on the day of confirmation, when they gave me the wine to sip and the wafer to ingest, I felt like a liar. And I took these sacraments and it felt completely wrong. And I came home not feeling real good about that experience.
Say more about that. Was it feeling like the search for like it had simply been a search for community, but what you were finding did not feel authentic to you?
That's right. And at that age, I wouldn't say I knew that I was searching for community, right? Like at that age, you're adolescent, you just want to fit in. You just want to belong, and you don't know that's what you're doing. And I think for me in my life, I started to shift into a place where, unfortunately, religious trauma happens to people who are vulnerable. And I'm going to expound a little bit on that. That same year, my best friend had been attending a camp, and up until 8th grade, it's a fun summer camp. And, one night might be movie night, one might be chapel night, but it's a lot more about play and kids being at camp. But the year that you turn 14, they offer a week called Youth Conference. The Youth Conference is much more steeped in religion and dogma. And in that experience at that camp, we were given messaging pretty much every day to consider accepting Christ as our Savior. For me, as someone who was lost and lonely, this message started to have a sense of maybe something I should move toward. And they do an activity on the last night of the week-long camp where the lights are all turned off on the campground, and we're given empty baby food jars, and we're set up in teams, and you have to generally make it through the stations of the cross. You have to get your baby food jar, and your team has to make it to the station where they're filled with sand, and then you have to run to the station where the grape juice is added to the jar, so you've now collected the body of Christ and the blood of Christ, and then once you get that, you have to make it to the final station. And there are other teams out there that are the captors that are designed to interrupt you from getting there. And it's in pitch black, and it's very dark and very scary, and kids are screaming as they're running, and there's spies telling you some teams have already been caught, and your team has to make it for all teams to be saved. And it was a pretty terrifying night. I got really scared, and I remember saying, if you let my team win, then I'll accept Christ as my savior. I have vague memory of the next day being in the church with my camp counselor, going through some sort of ritual, some sort of things I had to repeat, some sort of blessings I was given. Camp ended that afternoon, and I went home, and I didn't have anyone to talk about what I had been through.
Yeah.
But I had a sense, a deep sense, that something was really wrong with what had happened. On one hand, I thought I had committed a sin, that I had done something wrong because I had gone through something that I actually didn't believe in. But on the second hand, I also just felt like it wasn't true. And I'll just add, somewhere in the following week, I distinctly remember this experience. I've recounted it my whole life, laying on my bed and having an awareness of my hands and my energy, and literally just kind of watching how I was able to choose how to move and have sensation. And in that moment, I just realized that the story I was taught, that I had some spirit that would then go to heaven and live there eternally with a God, didn't make sense to me, because science class told me that energy can't be created or destroyed. And this was energy as I was experiencing it. And so I felt like in that moment, I understood the universe from a whole new perspective.
Wow.
It just changed my path. It changed my whole understanding of Christianity. And at that age, I didn't know what the word dogma was or propaganda, but I just knew that I had been told a story that didn't resonate with my being, like my being. These things that we're talking about changed the whole trajectory of my life and my spiritual life and my journey to find belonging in community.
Rhiana, it's so special to hear that piece of your journey, because Michelle, some of the things that we've talked about before in previous episodes, it seems like that sense of a search for community, but a need for it to be authentic and real for you. So here you hear like young Rhiana, it was a longing for that community. So here there was, quote unquote, community, you could say, if you define it that way, but it wasn't something that was nourishing and authentic to you. You were not able to voice, this is how I really am, this is how I really feel, which is not this. So there's such a juxtaposition, it seems to me, in that our deep, deep need for that community and for that connection. But my gosh, if it is in a way that is so opposite of who we are, my gosh, that can also be harmful. There's the harm that occurs by not having community. But on the other hand, here's the harm that occurs by, yes, it's community, but my gosh, it is harming your very being in a way.
Yeah.
What I find so profound, Rhiana, is that you were so young when this happened. Like, I think, that
14.
age is 14. I know. So your brain is still learning and growing, and it's very malleable at that point. And the fact that you felt it in your very body at that age, you're like, I've only been alive for 14 rotations of the earth at this point, or 13, 14 times around the sun. But yeah, you knew that it wasn't feeling good to you. So yeah, I just find that, wow, 14-year-old Rhiana knew.
That's right. And no adult to bounce it off of to receive any validation that, you can trust that intuitive knowing, right? And
that's right. That's right.
I mean, I would say that my whole journey, my whole walk on this earth, which now I've gone around 57 times, Michelle, almost 58, has really been as a seeker, seeking community, seeking meaning, seeking belonging. I'm someone who's moved a lot. I'm someone who's had lots of different jobs. I've been a student of Wicca and ordained in the Wiccan tradition. I've been a student of Tibetan Buddhism, Japanese Buddhism. I've hung out with the Unitarian Universalists. You know, all of that came out of those painful experiences at a really young age. And you know, at this point in my life, what I see now in looking back is all of these spiritual paths that I've walked aren't any different from each other. You can call one Wicca and you can call one Buddhism. And yes, there are tenets and rituals and practices for each, but it's really about connecting to something so much greater than myself, which maybe some people that is their experience of God. For me, it's an experience of what I understand to be the universe, and to consider the interconnectedness and interpenetration of all things. And ultimately what I think it all is love.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what we look for in connection, right? To feel loved, to
that's right.
offer love,
to feel like you matter, like you matter. This is a place where you matter. You know, Rhiana, it's so interesting because it's almost like the journey that you, from a very young age, started on is so reflective, I think, of the journey of so many of us in this current moment. Whereas this is not working for me. This particular place that I thought might be community for me, it is not. You know, maybe it's now harmful or it's just no more. But where I thought I could find community, for so many of us now, you know, it is that seeking that you're talking about. It's like a real case study that so many of us are going through now, in that this is what I know I need. I feel it in my body. This is what I'm seeking. How is that found? How do I build that? As you left childhood and entered into a young adulthood, because you also mentioned, and you and I have talked about this before too, about moving. I mean, there was a lot of like we're talking about like physical moving from one place to, you know, like packing up the boxes. Here we go. Yeah. That there's something in that is also, it's difficult, as we are a moving nation, you know, that something about that, the physical moving of it all also adds a layer of difficulty, I think.
Yeah. In fact, when I finished my undergrad in Boston, I wanted to leave Boston and I went south and did not find what I thought I was going to find. I went to North Carolina and I went to Charlotte. It was an up and coming city in the, you know, late 80s, early 90s. And I had notions about my degree and where it would take me there. And I really didn't land where I thought I was going to land. And I remember distinctly driving through Charlotte one day and realizing I had zero history and zero connection to the city that I had moved to. And in that moment, I felt this longing to return to Boston that just I knew I had to do. And so after being only there for, I think, 9 or 10 months, I packed up and went back to Boston. And it was this sense of returning to what was familiar, returning to my friends that had stayed in Boston after college that were still there, and going back to be part of community there. Unfortunately, I don't do well in New England winters. They're really gray and really wet and really cold. And I'm someone who definitely gets affected by that lack of sunlight and was pretty unhappy back there. And so I think that's really where it started. And I really started to feel like, why stay in one place? Go explore. And actually what I did in that moment was, this is a little side note, but I packed up my small amount of belongings and I got in my car and I traveled the United States for 6 months by myself. And I did spend the winter, I stayed still for a little bit of time, but I traveled the United States and I went to 42 out of the 50 states. I drove something like 12,000 miles. And I met people from all over the world that were traveling the United States. And I would have these like really beautiful moments of connection, staying in a youth hostel in New Orleans with a bunch of people from Germany, or staying at a youth hostel, out near the Grand Canyon and watching the moon rise over the Grand Canyon on the spring solstice. Or, I did all these amazing things, but it really sent me on this kind of belief that you could just go somewhere new and explore. And the downside to that is when you arrive in that new place, you don't necessarily know anybody, and you have to start building community each time. And oftentimes we find our community through work. When I became a nurse, all my friends were nurses, and I had great community through nursing. When I was doing environmental activism work, I bonded with a lot of great folks doing environmental activist work. And, we're all still friends on Facebook to this day. But I think for me at this stage in my life, the more disconnected I've become from things like a career and a Monday through Friday 9 to 5 schedule, or not finding a Buddhist temple where I live now that serves me the way the Buddhist temple I was part of in California served me. It creates a feeling of loneliness. It's a lot harder now, I think, at my age. I don't go to bars. I've been sober for 24 years, so I'm not going out to bars to meet people, and not meeting coworkers. So that's where the moving and the excitement of new and different experiences has a downside. Michelle, I'm thinking about you, and you just uprooted your life after several years of school in another town, and now you're starting over, and you're going through probably a similar search for community too.
Right. And I really connected to something that you said. It's like when you move to this new city, and I had this moment kind of driving through the city running errands the other day. It's like that realization that, wow, I don't have any roots here. I don't know anybody else here except for the person I moved with. And it's just a feeling of, it's not necessarily a terrible feeling. It's kind of like a sobering feeling. You're like, wow, I'm not connected to this place. And as Mom can attest, is like, I don't really have a hometown or a place that feels like connection and community, because our lives have always just been moving from place to place, and it does take time. You start completely over every time, and it's like just as things get to go, oh, now we're moving again, and you have to start over again. That nomadic lifestyle, it has its benefits. You get to have a bigger world view, meet people you never would otherwise, but you lose the opportunity to kind of put down roots and really have a place that means something to you, have that community. Thank you for sharing that, Rhiana. That feels so true.
Yeah.
And I think what you two are saying too, it speaks again to this modern moment that so many of us find ourselves in. It is a modern conundrum, isn't it? I mean, you think of like early humans, they moved around like to find the next where the food was. They were going as a group. And so here we are, like we may need to be mobile here, but we're all picking up and moving because here's where some food may be.
That's right. And in tribes of like 50 to 150 people, like small communities.
Yeah, we all go together.
There's a sense of care here. We're all going to do this together, and it matters that we all go together. That modern sense of the possibilities that are now open, we can go, and so many of us, remote work has opened up a lot for people like, now
COVID changed.
That's right. I can live here and do my work. I can, pick up and move here. What is lost in that is something lost in that in terms of without the rootedness, is there something that feels adrift? But now let me, introduce the other side of that too. For those of us who maybe there was rootedness, but you did not feel like you fit with where you were rooted. I want to highlight that as well, because, that's kind of, again, the other end of this. I myself have felt, and I've talked to numerous people who've said, gosh, this is home. I've lived most of my life in this place or whatever, but my ideas of the world, may look very different than most of the people in my community or town that I find myself in. Or this is where I've lived most of my life and I feel very rooted, but yet I would have these broad sense of ideas that I am just not finding connection here in. A person almost needs some of both, of like, where can I be authentic? Where can I be truly me? but yet where can I find that sense of I belong here, which Rhiana kind of speaks to what, I mean, again, back to your journey, even in childhood, is that it was almost that both. Where is
Yeah.
there a place for me, but that I'm also can be myself?
I had two thoughts as you were saying that. One is I did have an opportunity at another time in my childhood, 2 years before the Christian camp. I got to come out to Colorado to kind of a Western camp where I learned how to backpack and ride horses and raft rivers and camp. And it's no surprise to me that several times in my life, I've ended up back in the Rocky Mountains. I was in Montana for a while and then having come to Colorado. So there's a sense of belonging to a place, belonging to like a region. I've spent most of my life on the coasts, growing up in Pittsburgh, many years in Boston, and then being on the West Coast for half of my life. I was on the West Coast for almost 25 years. But something about the mountains and being in this place feels more like home to me and where I belong. So I was thinking about how we find that, how we sense into knowing that. And the hope, I guess, is that you connect with community when you land in that place because others have also chosen that place or are in that place. And so you have something shared. But I was also thinking about the dilemma that people experience about not belonging in their own families.
Yes.
You know, what
Yes.
people suffer when they feel like their siblings and cousins that have different values and different political leanings and different priorities, you know, and how that can also be incredibly isolating for folks too. And what happens when you look around and you find you don't fit.
That's right.
Rhiana, I just thank you for bringing that up because even though I've been displaced moving around quite a few times, either with my, at first with my family, now by myself, I have the privilege of knowing that no matter where I go, there's that support system of my mom and of my dad who they're going to be there, no matter what. They're a phone call away. And that is so lucky. And that gives me strength to tackle this new place, knowing nobody because I know they're there. But imagine you don't have that support. You don't have that supportive nest that's all you can fall back into no matter what. And I think Mom's talked about it. She has us, but there's that loneliness that, you don't have a nest. And I can imagine for people that is just doubly isolating.
Ashley, we've talked about that.
That's right. I think too, that is more and more, you talk about the modern landscape of it all. I think that is occurring more and more for families where maybe you thought, okay, here's my scenario, but my family is somewhere that, maybe I do have support. There is, at least that bit of community. But then, I know the last number of years, I think it's been very difficult for individuals on family levels as well. Sometimes if that is, maybe you thought there was going to be support there and there's not. And now that feels like a broken place as well. And, you thought that at least here's some community. Oh my gosh, it turns out that's not a supportive place. And so I do think to bring forward, Rhiana, what you're talking about at the start of the show, that goes into the sheer number, the huge statistics we're talking about, this deep loneliness of, these are some of the stories that make up those numbers. People who maybe there was community at one point, at least within the family, but now even that may no longer be. Where are we to go with that? And we've talked about before, the other piece of this, Rhiana, and you as a nurse could speak to this loneliness. We're not just talking about emotional hurt here. These are physical conditions that can arise, when people are lacking without this community, without this sense of support, whether it's from the family or, place you're living in, or this loneliness is harmful in multiple ways, in our bodies even.
It is. And having that loneliness affect like your cardiac system, your nervous system, I mean, all of the ways that it can impact our health is really alarming, really, to be honest. And I'm thinking about this study that I had read once that was tied into Buddhist practice. And it was tied into how, as a Zen Buddhist, we sit meditation as one of our primary practices. And we sit in a temple together, and it's all very silent. And Zen Buddhists are famous for facing the wall. We actually sit on mats and we face the wall. And when you approach your mat, you give it a little bow, and then you turn and you bow to the temple, and then you take your seat silently. And one of the studies talked about the fact that our limbic system is activated just by knowing another person is near. So even though we're not talking to each other and we're sitting in silence, there's this form that we take of, we bow to the seat, not because the seat is something to revere. It's a way of just acknowledging, like, there's something special about coming to this time to take up my seat and be in stillness and allow my mind to quiet as much as possible, and to do it in community with each other. And we call that Sangha in Buddhism. And the limbic system is stimulated and supported by that sense of relation. You know, for me, that's a really powerful way of feeling belonging. And it is from a physiological experience. And, you know, so many of us are connecting online now. And I'm really curious if it can generate the same quality of connection. I think it's a wonderful resource that we have it. I think I have read some studies that say it's beneficial. Maybe it's not as beneficial as in person, but for those who are homebound or limited in finding their communities, it's pretty amazing that the virtual world is giving us at least access to connecting that way as well.
At least something. That feels right. In the search for community, some way of having it, if it can't be the physical piece, that is there a way that there's something about us in community online? That is, Oh, Rhiana, this is so good. I so appreciate you sharing with us your story and your journey, because it really feels like it highlights what so many of us are going through. What do we say? Oftentimes the specific is universal, you know?
That's it. That's it.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to share some of these vulnerable pieces of my life, because I know I'm not the only one. And I know that part of the connection that we're all seeking and not feeling alone is knowing that our stories are shared and understood.
That's right.
And this podcast you guys are offering is really a gift in that. And I'm so grateful for Ashley and Michelle, for the two of you bringing this to the world, because I think this is a really important ongoing conversation that you've created.
Well, we appreciate that. And thank you so much for your work. And not one single one of us is alone. You know, we're doing, on this life journey together. So, okay. So Rhiana, Michelle and I have been ending the episodes with a little segment that we have decided to call A Step From Here. We put a little name to our segment, but essentially this segment is about, like, are there ways, you know, little things that we can do, tangible things in our daily life as the week goes on, tangible things that might help build care for ourselves, for others, that might help build connection for ourselves and with others? Are there some things that we can kind of take with us? So is there anything that you have in mind that we might take with us this week?
Yeah. You know, Michelle and I were talking about this earlier. She calls it the 5-4-3-2-1, as it's known for a lot of people. It's a really easy little technique that's really about, like, somatic sensing, somatic meaning in the body. And I think part of where we struggle is in our mind. We struggle with our thoughts and our feelings. And I think sometimes when we come home to our body, which is really the work that I think I'm doing in my life, is how to come home to the body. A really great technique is this 5 sense technique. So I'll walk you through it. You're going to start just with a breath and take a moment to find 5 things that you can see. And you're just looking around in your environment and just being present with your experience. You look for 5 things that you can see. And then after that, 4 things that you can touch. And you just notice the feel of the things. And then from there, 3 things that you're hearing. And you listen for the sounds in your environment. And then 2 things that you can smell. You notice, different scents in your home or in the space that you're in or outdoors. And lastly, something that you can taste. Might be the tea you just drank, might be your toothpaste. But coming into these five senses really brings us into our body and gives us a moment to kind of center and reground. And I think when we feel centered and grounded, we don't feel so alone. We recognize that we are a connected human being.
That's right. That's right. That feels so important. Oh, Rhiana, thank you. And I think too, just that kind of centered and groundedness, it does allow for more genuine connection, like you said, with the world, with the other people, because you are in a place where you can receive that and give that. So thank you.
That's right.
I will be doing that this week. Thank you.
That is, that's one of my personal favorites, Rhiana. Thank you.
Yeah. We're all using our five senses to find our way through our day, and we forget that they're really guiding us, right? And then that intuitive sense, that sixth sense, that's even more important.
That's right. Oh, that's so good. That's so good. Well, thank you again, Rhiana. It has been a gift. Thank you as always. And
what a joy to be here with you too.
Oh, what a pleasure. All right, everybody.
We hope to see you again, and that you'll come back and join us.
I would love to be back, and I'd love to bring some friends with me. I've got folks that I think we could talk to.
Exactly. Listeners, we will be seeing Rhiana again real soon. So thank goodness for that, and keep these wonderful conversations going.
Yes.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Well, that sounds good. So we'll connect again soon, listeners. And as always, connect with us and leave comments. Let us know your thoughts and what is going on for you in these days. And we look so forward to hearing from you. We'll connect
Talk
soon.
again soon.
Bye.